Hello, it is Tuesday, July the 18th, and the topic of today's video is going to be about Mars in Virgo in opposition to Saturn in Pisces. And I already kind of previewed this in my last video, which was about Mars's ingress into Virgo, and since we're in the first decan here, this sort of opposition has been active for a while, but today it's within 1 degree with Mars at 0.5 and Saturn at 0.6, and then over the next few days, this opposition is going to be perfecting and is going to be particularly strong, so I figured I might as well do a video on it. And, there's a lot of other things that I'm interested in. Like, I've been reading a lot of books recently, and sometimes I try to... In the past, I was trying to sort of weave in the philosophy and the kinds of things I was reading into my astrology. But this one, I don't really have too much of a fancy idea. It's more of just kind of reading it plainly, and I was a little bit maybe procrastinating, holding off on this one, because I don't necessarily view Mars opposite Saturn to be, that encouraging, because they're both the two malefics in opposition to each other. But I figured, when I was thinking about it, I figured that even if, this is actually a strong point, I think, of traditional astrology that doesn't just sort of gloss over everything that you can only see an astrology forecast as being useful in terms of what good things are going to come out of it and how to view it all positively, because part of the reasoning for why we do things like astrology forecasts in the first place is to, if there is certain, let's say, transits which may trigger us, or that we're going into a certain period of time and we can see that there's difficulties involved in that, we can get a kind of idea of what kind of difficulties they may be, and we may adjust our expectations accordingly. And like, for example, it's the middle of summer or the beginning of summer, however you want to look at it, and I have noticed a lot of people with camper vans and RVs and everybody going out for their summer vacations. And, if you already have your summer vacation planned for when there's a Mars-Saturn opposition perfecting, what can I say? Lord help you. There's not much you can do about it if you're already going out on summer vacation, but there's certain things that may be difficulties that may arise out of this that may make it not really the most ideal time for that kind of stuff. And let's just take a look at this, right? So, first of all, Mars having to do with things like, what does it stand for? The god of war. It stands for things like accidents and injuries, and fights and stuff like that. And in an opposition to something with Saturn, which also stands for things like, sickness and illnesses or disabilities. There's often stands for kind of a limitation, right? And I think there's like an issue here. If you could imagine like the kind of person who might overestimate how strong they are, and they try to pick up something that is enormously heavy, and they end up giving themselves a hernia because they underestimated how much weight they could hold. Actually, it's kind of funny. The other day, I was reorganizing things, and there's like a kind of a drawer, and I put too much heavy stuff in a drawer, and then the drawer just gave out because it was like there was overweighted the amount of the kind of stuff I was putting in there. And I think that could be an example where you're trying to be maybe productive, you're trying to clean up, you're trying to get stuff done, but you overestimate how much weight something can take, and then you damage something or you break something, and hopefully you don't damage or break yourself by overestimating how much weight you can take, right? There's certain things that go with this that, considering that it's the middle of the summer, there could be the sort of the quality of heat. Like, personally, I don't find it like... I guess in the middle of the day it's starting to get pretty hot, but I live in BC and things are pretty temperate around here. But, often during, when the hot season, it can be good to like take a siesta in the afternoon. And I think that there's something about this especially if you look at the tarot cards associated, that the first decan of Virgo is associated with the 8 of discs, or the 8 of pentacles, or 8 of coins, or whatever you want to say. And that's in Crowley's deck, that's called Prudence. And in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, it shows a guy who's like working at his workbench, and he's just hammering away making pentacles, and he's making a whole bunch of them, right? So there's something about this first degree of Virgo that I think has to do with practicality, right? And Mars, the energy of Mars can be very like having the energy to put into something, but Saturn stands for more of like fatigue in contrast to that. And so one of the things that I was considering was that it could still potentially have the potential for being productive and getting productive, practical things done. However, there's this kind of thing like if you're doing physical work, and if you do a lot of physical work, you could become very, very exhausted by that process, right? And that another thing to take in consideration is that Saturn is in Pisces, which is a water sign, and that there's a sort of thing about physical exhaustion, like doing lots of hard work and getting your body properly tired and worn out and needing a rest. And then to contrast with that, there's also emotional exhaustion, where if you are, let's say, you could spend the day working, but if you're you may not get as much work done, but instead of having a big emotional reaction and find yourself like, I think that a lot of the times people may use the word depression to describe a state of being numbed out or not feeling like you have energy. But I think oftentimes that could just come in because a person is feeling emotionally exhausted, that they're consistently having emotional reactions which consume a lot of energy, and they have a big fuss, or they raise their voice, and then they're just wiped out, and then they have to they're depressed for like next 3 days because they've burnt so much energy up in an emotional reaction, right? And so I think that's another thing to consider with Mars and Saturn in opposition to each other, is that there could be like, if you are doing a lot of hard work and it seems like an insurmountable obstacle, that in itself could be frustrating if you feel like you're not making any progress or something like that, or that it could be the thing that you do make progress, but the price of that progress is a feeling of great fatigue and exhaustion, or that you've really you've really burnt yourself out, or you could even become injured if you're not careful, if by overestimating your capacity and you put yourself out, and then you really have to rest, right? There's also, what am I trying to say? There's the capacity for emotional frustration because Mars can also just stand for the problem of temperamentality and getting into fights with others, and and becoming depressed or exhausted, because sometimes depression is actually a mechanism that helps us to not fight with people, because if we are there's an idea that says that to be angry and to fight is actually more of a sign of positivity, or the yang, or it's like usually when you're picking a fight, it's because you sense that things could be better. There's this kind of idea, like I just finished reading the Idiot, and they kept using this word indignation, right? Or there's a sense of things that are unfair, that things could be better, things could be more fair, things could be more just, and so that you're like fighting because you feel like things are unfair or whatever, right? I'm not sure where I'm going with this. I'm actually kind of getting distracted. Where is my train of thought going? The emotions of fighting and bicker. Whatever. It's all Mars stuff, anyways, right? But it could be you could have Saturn stands for limitations, so it could be the physical limitation of somebody who can't lift very much and they give themselves a hernia. It could be the limitations of even just working really hard in the hot heat and the sun and the conditions, feeling like you need to take a break during the hot hours of the day or something. It could also have to do with just frustrations at people and Saturn being limitation, or being like the limitations of people's thought if people are ignorant, if people are, you consider people to be stupid or something. And for this particular reason, I've been noticing it leading up to this transit that I'm considering maybe I should just avoid Facebook for the entirety of this, the next few days, because I have just been finding Facebook is like really good at just, me being easily irritated by things that I'm sure maybe other people would just scroll over or not give much thought to. But I'm not going to get into the particular points of what irritates me on Facebook right now, but just like the whole milieu of where everybody's at, I find it to be kind of frustrating. Or it could be also like whatever I have to also admit that in an economic sense, there's this whole idea called as austerity, right? Which is that in the sense that if people are feeling the pinch, the economic pinch, like the cost of living is too much, and that in order to budget yourself out or do what you want to do in life, you find that you have to make sacrifices and stuff like that in order to just budget yourself out or to adapt to the current economic situation. I think there's something to be careful for. I mean, I don't know. I think it can be really insidious, right? Is that oftentimes when I see certain new age things going around, like to let go of what no longer serves you, like I'm almost like, I don't use that phrase very much, and it feels kind of like awful in a sense, because if I was somebody who's making astrology videos, I mean, you could just whip that one out whenever you didn't have an idea for a video. You could just say, let go of what no longer serves you, and it could probably be, you can make it work for like half the. you could just have like a bunch of like a handful of things that you can make your little like flashcards, and then you pull out the one that says let go of what no longer serves you, and just pull these random, it could be like oracle decks. Maybe that could be its own form of divination. But I mean, what I'm trying to say is that it seems like a kind of automatic, regurgitated, uninspired way to look at astrology, for one thing. And another thing is that I'm concerned that a lot of times when we're talking about what serves us, we're talking about what serves us in terms of being a subject in a neoliberal capitalist society. I mean, that's just using a bunch of big words, but being subjected to this thing of like, oh, if I have the certain thing that I love doing, but this thing either costs money or it costs time, and I could get rid of that and instead replace it with something that's giving me an income, or just basically seeing everything through a utilitarian point of view of like what serves you. It basically serves you as a entity of, somebody who has debts to pay off, or has to make money, or has to perform in a certain way in the economy, and that that things can serve you in ways that are not just financially appropriate, or that you can do something, you can have an artistic project that is for art's sake, and not for the sake of moving you up in society, or trying to inflate your bank account, or whatever, right? Like that, what that, or like that. I think that's in the language too. What serves you? Well, what about how can you be of service to something else, right? Like, why are you always so concerned about what serves you? You could serve some other cause, right? Like, it doesn't always have to be about this. Like, whatever serves me is kind of like the capitalism of the ego, right? I don't know. I'm just kind of riffing here anyways, right? But that's one thing that I think to be aware of with Mars opposite Saturn, is that there may be, because Saturn has to do with endings, right? It has to do with time. It has to do with long periods of time. That there could be, you could feel like this sort of, and Mars often has to do with cutting, right? Cutting ties, making a run for it, or just like splitting off, dividing, divorces, things like that. There could be this sort of sense that, like with Mars opposite Saturn, that there's something that is just no longer working out for you, and that there's a lot of pressure to move on from that, to do something different, and that but I worry about the whole self-help kind of culture, about how, it's kind of funny, because there's a lot of things that, it's, whether we're framing quitting and moving on from things as being a good thing or a bad thing, because I often think there's so many things in life where, to just walk away is actually really easy, right? Like, I mean, there's so many things where it's like, it's so easy just to not do things or to stop doing things, but to have a kind of a tenacity to sort of dig yourself in and keep at it, even when it's tough, even when it seems like frustrating, even when it seems unrewarding, and even if it seems like it's not serving you or anybody else, whatever that's supposed to mean, you know, I think there's a certain kind of a tenacity that's in there to just kind of stick at it and keep going and not give up. Although in a sort of Saturn opposite Mars transit, it could feel very frustrating, or it could feel like, you know, pushing the rock up the hill and not making any progress and not getting anywhere, and it's too hot out and I'm tired and I'm too old for this shit anyways. That could be another one, feeling like you're too old for it, you can't keep up with the youngsters, you know what I mean? All this kind of stuff that, you know, in some cases it may be appropriate to quit things, in some cases not, but I think there's certain there's the limitations and the frustration with the limitations that can almost feel like claustrophobic at times, right? And one of the images, and another image that came up for me about this was like, have you ever been in a traffic jam in the middle of the summer? And it's like, being in a traffic jam is worse enough as it is, but like when you're stuck in a traffic jam and the heat is just beating down on you, and like the tire might just roll like a little bit, like every minute, just and you're not getting anywhere, and you're just like, oh, I need to get out. like that feeling, right, of this being like stuck in like gridlock traffic, and you just want to be anywhere but in this stupid car. And I'm like, that's one of the, I mean, I don't know. There's certain things like I don't drive yet, and I'm considering getting a license. But there's something about not driving that I can at least be like, at least imagine all the traffic jams that I've managed to avoid by not being a driver, right? And that it's like, at least, I don't know, that gives me at least a sort of like, I don't know, I may be frustrated in the situation that I am, and I may see something like getting a car as a way to give myself more agency, or to give myself more freedom to go here and there or whatever. But there's also a trade-off where, I mean, you all might find yourself in these situations where you do this thing that's supposed to give you all this freedom and agency, may feel like you're trapped in the most claustrophobic damn prison of them all, right? And it's like, you know, or like, it kind of reminds me, there's a Tom Waits interview where they ask him if you've ever lived in a car, and he's like, well, I think everybody's lived in a car for at least some point in the time in their lives, right? Okay. Hopefully this isn't just incoherent rambling. Hopefully there is some kind of a point you're getting to this transit. But like I said, I'm honestly, you know, I was posting some stuff on Facebook where I was feeling kind of like the summertime blues, right? And that all of this has to do with the fact that I'm kind of socially isolated, and that I don't really have friends to do summertime things with, or that there are certain people that I may have had stuff going with in the past that I'm really just not interested in seeing, and I'm not interested in talking to, and you know, it's kind of it's one of the frustrating things is having to communicate that, because it pains me, because I want to be more of a I don't know, I want to be generally friendly in my demeanor to everybody, and I don't want to have to reject people or anything like that. But there's certain people that I'm done with, and I don't want to hang out with anymore. And that itself can be a frustration, right? Of having to say no over and over and over again to people who don't listen, who don't respect that you're not interested, right? And I think that, so respecting boundaries, or like having but Mars and Saturn is Saturn's more about boundaries, and Mars is about this kind of assertive, I just want what I want, and trying to push through and assert your agenda, maybe not respecting other people's limits or whatever, right? Or trying to make something go even after it's ended, or trying to make some kind of split from something, which is you know, it's like the zombie which keeps coming back and back and back, right? And you don't really want this zombie to keep harassing you anymore. That could that could be another thing, right? I feel like I'm just kind of rambling, anyways. Is there anything else about Mars opposite Saturn that I could throw in here? I did mention in my other video that eventually we're going to get Mercury in Virgo while Mars is still in Virgo, and that's going to be a different story because Mercury has double dignity. It's got both exaltation and domicile dignity in Virgo, so by the time that happens, it'll be a different story, but I'll probably make another video for that when it happens. And then, I don't know. I don't know if this is my best video I've ever done or not, but this at least helps to communicate some of the problems with Mars and Saturn in opposition. And, you know, I can also feel like this thing, I should mention that I've been thinking about going out to things in Vancouver because I haven't, you know, I've been recovering from some health problems, and since COVID happened and since I moved back to the mainland, I just haven't been going out and doing stuff. But there's something about this with the, I mentioned the Hermit card, like the Hermit is often associated with Virgo, but there's this kind of thing of wanting to break out, but the limitations of being, you know, Saturn being, feeling very walled in, blocked off, trying to overcome those challenges. But then it could very well be, I'm a little bit hesitant. I'm kind of hesitant to go out to like a bar or something like that where a lot of people are drinking, or especially under a transit like this, because I feel like there's this kind of a risk or a danger for people to be taking out their frustrations or something like that. Especially a kind of a, you know, macho frustration or something like that. And there's kind of these things where people could be trying to discharge a lot of energy, like blow off a lot of steam. And there may be a way to do that which is safe and healthy, and there may be ways in which is not so safe and healthy, or that you could be like, you know, you don't want, you know, this could be a kind of like you go to a heavy metal show and just get trampled in the mosh pit or something like that kind of trans with the Mars and the Saturn in opposition together. And it's one of those things where there could be a lot of pent up energy, a lot of pent up frustrations, and you don't want to be, you know, you could just be an innocent bystander that gets in the way of somebody else's frustration, and you don't want to do that under a transit like this, right? Right. Okay, so these are, I was thinking that this kind of thing, even though it's not positive, to be able to have a sense of when there are more difficult things happening, then we have the opportunity to not let ourselves get caught up in that dynamic by being able to say that there's a frustrating transit going on, that there is a transit where people might be more angry than usual, or people might be discharging their anger and frustration. We at least can be aware of that and then try to take responsibility for our own actions so that we're not doing that so much to other people. And so I think that it's good to be able to look at transits and not try to have to sugarcoat everything or try to make everything into like a opportunity to, you know what I'm saying? Like it's all just some sort of growth opportunity or something like that or whatever, right? Or it's all just some, you know, there's certain things where you can say this is actually a pretty shitty transit. Well, I don't want to make it that bad. I mean, it could be worse maybe, but there is something that is basically difficult about this, and to have that in mind as you approach the next few days, and to try to, though we can't control other people's actions, but we can control our own actions, and it also gives us more of a perspective of our own reactivity or emotional reactivity, so that we can sort of say, catch ourselves and say, hey, you know, I may be feeling all worked up, but I know that there's this Mars opposite Saturn in the beginning stages of the beginning of Virgo and Pisces, and we can understand how that's hitting each of our personal individual charts, and that we can with that in mind, we can think about that before we go and say something, and then we can catch ourselves and stuff like. I mean, and I don't mean that it's like maybe the right answer isn't to just repress everything, but at least we can consider this, and we can consider. You can use it as a tool not to to sort of mitigate how much of a reaction we're going to have, right? Because if you already know in advance what you're going to be reacting to or what you're going to be reacting about, you have an ability to sort of process that in some healthier ways rather than just blowing up on somebody or acting all frustrated, right? Okay. Well, okay, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. It helps my channel. And I am doing astrology readings. I am back in the game. And I've had some old clients of mine returning to ask for things like synastry readings and transits and other things than just doing birth charts. So I'm getting been getting some opportunity to practice the craft of astrology. And if you would like to support me, if you have a bit of extra money, throw it my way and I'll do a chart up for you. Thank you very much. Okay.